I silently endured being called a threat to my own grandson. But when she forced me to come to her party, she handed me the microphone. I raised a toast that made my son sob and instantly destroyed her lies in front of all their guests. For 5 years, my daughter in law, Sarah, had painted me as a monster, a toxic, unstable presence that needed to be kept away from her perfect family. And my son, David, the boy I raised to be strong and independent, just let her. He stood by, his face a mask of pained neutrality, as she slowly and methodically erased me from his life, and more importantly, from the life of my grandson, Leo. So when the thick, cream-colored envelope arrived, I knew it wasn't an olive branch. It was a summons, an invitation to their 10th wedding anniversary party. It was a command performance, a chance for Sarah to parade her victory, to show all their friends and family the tamed beast, the so-called problem, who now knew his place. She didn't want me there for forgiveness. She wanted me there as a trophy. If you enjoy stories like this where the truth comes out in the most unexpected ways, make sure you subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what's coming next. My first instinct was to burn it, to throw the perfectly calligraphed piece of paper into the fireplace and watch it turn to ash, just like my relationship with my son. But as I held it in my hand, a different feeling began to smolder in my gut. It wasn't anger, not anymore. It was something colder, quieter. It was resolve. For 5 years, I had played by her rules. I had stayed away, I had kept my mouth shut, I had endured the pitying looks from relatives and the awkward silence on the phone. But this invitation wasn't just an insult, it was a stage. And she was inviting me to perform. Little did she know, I was about to write my own script. The wall Sarah built between me and David wasn't constructed overnight. It was a slow, meticulous process, built brick by brick with whispers, half-truths, and expertly feigned tears. It started with small things. When Leo was a baby, I'd offer to babysit. "Oh, that's so sweet of you," Sarah would say, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "But we have a system. I just don't want to disrupt his routine." The system was her. Only her. Then came the subtle criticisms, always disguised as concern. "I noticed you gave Leo a cookie yesterday," she'd tell David later, her voice laced with manufactured worry. "It's just that his pediatrician is very strict about sugar. I know your dad means well, but he's a bit old-fashioned." I wasn't old-fashioned. I was a grandfather giving his grandson a treat. But the seed was planted. I was careless. I was a risk. My advice was always interference. My gifts were inappropriate. When I offered them a loan to help with the down payment on their house, she told David I was trying to control them with money. Every act of love was twisted into an act of aggression. David, who hated conflict more than anything, began to withdraw. Our phone calls became shorter. His visits became less frequent. He'd always have an excuse, a deadline at work, a weekend trip Sarah had planned. He was being pulled away and he didn't even fight the current. He just let it carry him further and further from shore, leaving me standing alone. The worst part was watching her isolate him. She became the gatekeeper to his entire life. She managed his schedule, his friendships, his family ties. He was living in a gilded cage he didn't even realize was locked. And I, the person who had taught him how to ride a bike and how to stand up for himself, was cast as the villain trying to break in. The wall was almost complete. All she needed was one big dramatic event to place the final brick. And I, in my ignorance, was about to hand it to her. The final brick in Sarah's wall was a stuffed giraffe. It was a beautiful toy about 2 feet tall with soft, fuzzy fur and kind, glassy eyes. I'd found it in a small independent toy shop and immediately thought of Leo. He was 3 at the time and obsessed with animals. I bought it without a second thought, wrapped it in bright blue paper, and brought it with me the next time I was allowed a supervised visit. Leo's eyes lit up the moment he saw it. He tore off the paper and hugged the giraffe with all his might, a huge, pure smile on his face. For a few minutes, everything was perfect. It was just a grandfather and his grandson, sharing a moment of joy. Sarah watched from the doorway, her arms crossed, her own smile tight and unnatural. I should have recognized the look. It was the look of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That evening, the phone call came. It wasn't Sarah, it was David. His voice was tense, accusatory. Dad, what were you thinking? The giraffe. Did you even look at the tag? I was completely bewildered. What are you talking about? It's a stuffed animal, David. It's made with some kind of synthetic wool, Dad. Leo has a mild allergy to it. He broke out in a small rash on his arms after you left. Sarah is furious. She said you did it on purpose. I was stunned into silence. A small rash? On purpose? Son, that's insane. I would never ever do anything to hurt Leo, you know that. How could I have known? You should have asked, Dad. He shot back, his voice rising. Sarah says we've talked about his sensitive skin 100 times. Hey, she thinks you ignore everything she says, that you do things like this just to undermine her. The script was perfect. It was a masterful piece of manipulation. She had taken a minor, unforeseeable issue, a small rash from a common material, and weaponized it. She had twisted it into an act of malicious intent. In her version of the story, I wasn't a loving grandfather who made an innocent mistake. I was a monster who deliberately harmed his own grandson to spite his mother. It was the perfect, undeniable proof of my toxicity. From that day on, the supervised visits stopped. The phone calls became even rarer. The wall was complete, and I was locked out for good. The stuffed giraffe sat on a shelf in Leo's room, a silent monument to her victory. I finally decided to call. My hand trembled as I picked up the phone. It felt heavier than usual, like it was made of lead. I hadn't spoken to David in 3 months, not since our last stilted conversation that ended with him saying, "I'll call you later, Dad." A promise he never kept. Dialing his number felt like stepping off a cliff. My thumb hovered over the call button. What if Sarah answered? The thought sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Taking a shaky breath, I pressed down. It rang once, twice, each ring echoing in the hollow space in my chest. On the third, he answered. Hello? His voice was wary, distant. Not the voice of my son, but the voice of a stranger, answering a call from an unknown number. David, it's Dad. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear him breathing. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the mental script Sarah had installed clicking into place. Oh, he finally said. Hey, Dad, I'm surprised you called. I got your invitation, I said, my voice sounding more steady than I felt. For the anniversary, it looks very nice. Yeah, it is. Sarah planned everything, he replied, the words coming out too quickly. She's been working really hard on it. Even now, he was defending her, building her up. I'm sure she has, I said, forcing the bitterness down. I'm calling to let you know I'll be there. There was another pause, but this time I could feel the tension crackling through the phone. It was the sound of a man caught between two opposing forces. Oh, great, he said, the words sounding hollow. That's great. Sarah will be glad to hear that. It was such a blatant lie, it was almost comical. Then his voice changed, dropping into a low, conspiratorial tone. The voice of a hostage negotiator. Listen, Dad, I'm really glad you're coming. I am. But it's a big night for us, for Sarah. She's been really stressed, so could you just, keep it simple? No big speeches, no drama, please. For me, drama. The word hung in the air between us. She had managed to frame a father's love as drama. She had turned my very existence into a source of conflict. He wasn't asking me to behave. He was begging me to be invisible, to be a ghost at the feast, a harmless prop that wouldn't upstage the star of the show. He was so completely brainwashed, so thoroughly defeated, that he was now actively working as his own zookeeper. Something inside me, the last flicker of angry, wounded pride, finally went out. It was replaced by a cold, surgical calm. My son wasn't a man to be angry with. He was a victim to be rescued. David, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. You don't have to worry about a thing. I'll be there to celebrate you and Sarah. It will be a wonderful evening. The relief in his voice was pathetic. Oh, good. Thanks, Dad. That means a lot. Of course, son, I said. See you on Saturday. I hung up the phone. The house was silent again. But this time, it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a hunter waiting patiently in the tall grass. The invitation was no longer a summons. It was an opportunity. I wasn't a prop. I was a Trojan horse. And my son had just personally opened the gates. After I hung up the phone, my first impulse was pure, unadulterated rage. I wanted to rip the invitation into 1,000 tiny pieces and mail them back to her. My hands were shaking. Drama? He dared to ask me not to cause drama? The audacity was breathtaking. I paced my living room like a caged animal, replaying every condescending word, every false apology, every manipulative tear Sarah had ever used. My mind screamed, "Don't go! Why would you walk into the lion's den? Let them have their perfect party in their perfect lie of a life." I walked over to my desk, fully intending to write a curt, formal email declining the invitation due to a prior engagement. It was the sensible thing to do, the self-respecting thing to do. Protect myself from more pain. But as I sat down, my anger began to subside, replaced by a profound and hollow sadness. I wasn't just angry at Sarah, I was heartbroken for David. The boy I had raised, the one who used to have such a strong sense of right and wrong, was gone. In his place was a man who spoke with his wife's voice, thought with his wife's logic, and saw the world through his wife's distorted lens. Rejecting the invitation wouldn't be a victory. It would be a surrender. It would be me accepting the role she had written for me. The bitter, difficult father who couldn't even be bothered to show up for his own son's anniversary. It would just be more ammunition for her. You see? I could almost hear her saying to David, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. I tried, I really did. But he's just too toxic. No, I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. If I was going to be a character in her play, I would do it on my own terms. And that's when the idea began to form. It started as a tiny spark in the back of my mind. What if I didn't go to fight? What if I didn't go to argue or make a scene? Sarah expected me to be angry. She was prepared for that. She thrives on confrontation because it allows her to play the victim. But what if I showed up and was perfect? Polite, quiet, smiling? What if I gave her nothing to use against me? And what if, in the middle of her perfectly orchestrated party, I used my one moment in the spotlight, the toast, not to attack her, but to do something far more devastating? What if I reminded my son who I really was? Not with accusations, but with a memory. Not with anger, but with love. I wouldn't need to expose her lies. I would just need to shine a light so bright that the lies would expose themselves. The plan was terrifying. It was risky. But for the first time in 5 years, I felt a flicker of hope. The Trojan horse wouldn't be filled with soldiers, it would be filled with the truth. My plan required a weapon, but not a conventional one. It couldn't be loud or aggressive. It had to be quiet, precise, and completely disarming. It had to be a memory. I spent the next few days sifting through the archives of my mind, searching for the perfect story, something that was just about me and David, something Sarah couldn't possibly twist or co-opt. I dug out the old photo albums, the ones with the sticky plastic pages and the faded, yellowing pictures. I flipped past birthdays, holidays, and family vacations. And then I found it. A picture of me and David fishing at Miller's Pond. He must have been about 10. He was holding up a tiny, shimmering sunfish, his face a mixture of intense pride and slight disgust at having to hold the slimy creature. I was kneeling beside him, my arm around his shoulders, beaming with a father's pure, unadulterated love. Looking at that photo, the memory came flooding back in perfect detail. But it wasn't the fishing trip itself that was the key. It was what happened a few weeks later, the memory of the broken window. It was so clear, so potent. It was a perfect, self-contained story of a father's love and a son's fear. It was a secret just between the two of us, a moment of sacred trust. It was the weapon. I didn't write a speech. Writing it down would make it feel stiff, rehearsed. I needed it to come from the heart, so instead I practiced the feeling. I sat in my armchair, closed my eyes, and took myself back to that summer afternoon. I remembered the scent of cut grass, the sound of the neighbors' angry shouting, the feeling of David's small, trembling hand in mine. I let the emotions of that memory, the protective love, the parental sacrifice, wash over me until they were as real and present as the air I was breathing. I didn't need to rehearse the words, "I love you," or "I would do anything for you." The story did that for me. It was a living demonstration of that love. And it had one crucial element, a lie. A lie told to protect my son. That was the key. The beautiful, terrible, poetic key that would unlock everything. I put the photo album away. I didn't need it anymore. The weapon wasn't the picture, it was the story behind it. And it was sharpened, polished, and ready. When I pulled up to their house on Saturday evening, it was even more perfect than I had imagined. Fairy lights were strung through the trees, casting a soft golden glow over the manicured lawn. Music drifted through the open doors, and the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. It looked like a scene from a magazine, a perfect home for a perfect family. I took a deep breath, straightened my tie, and walked up the stone pathway. The front door was open. As I stepped inside, the noise level dropped for a fraction of a second. A few heads turned. I saw the familiar expressions. Pity from a few old family friends, curiosity from Sarah's crowd, and outright suspicion from her closest allies. I was the ghost at the feast, the uninvited guest who had been invited. Sarah materialized at my side almost instantly. She was wearing a stunning silver dress, her hair and makeup flawless. She looked like a movie star. "You came," she said, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of warmth. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch as light and cold as a snowflake. "I'm so glad." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, my voice equally polite, equally fake. "Happy anniversary, Sarah." David appeared behind her. He looked exhausted, the skin around his eyes tight with stress. He gave me a weak, pleading look that said, "Please, just behave." I just nodded at him. "Son," and then I saw him. My grandson, Leo. He was standing near the fireplace holding a toy car. He was 8 now. He looked so much like David did at that age. It was like looking at a ghost. Our eyes met for a second. There was no recognition, no memory of me. Just a child's simple curiosity at the strange old man everyone was staring at. My heart broke. It was a clean, sharp break right down the middle. I wanted so badly to walk over, to kneel down and tell him who I was. But before I could even take a step, Sarah was there, swooping in like a hawk. "Leo, honey, come with Mommy," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Let's go find you some cake." She shot me a triumphant, warning glare over her shoulder as she steered him away. The message was clear: he is mine, not yours. You don't get to touch him. I watched them go, the cold resolve in my gut turning to ice. For the next hour, I was a ghost at the feast. I stood by the wall, nursing the same glass of water, a silent observer in a sea of manufactured joy. The party was a masterpiece of Sarah's design. Everything was perfect. The soft music, the gourmet food, the meticulously arranged flowers. It was a flawless illusion, and I was the only one who could see the cracks. The toast began. One by one, Sarah's friends stood up, champagne flutes in hand, to sing her praises. A woman named Jessica, her best friend, went first. To Sarah, she gushed, the most incredible mother and wife I know. She holds this family together with such grace. David, you are the luckiest man in the world. Everyone applauded. David forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Another friend stood up. I'll never forget when my own son was sick, he said, looking at Sarah with reverence. Sarah was the first one to call, the first one to bring over a home-cooked meal. She has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. More applause. I remembered a time when I used to bring them home-cooked meals before I was deemed too unstable to be trusted in their kitchen. The speeches went on, each one adding another layer of paint to the perfect portrait of Saint Sarah. They spoke of her kindness, her strength, her selflessness. With every word, my resolve hardened. They weren't just toasting the friend, they were unknowingly testifying against me, reinforcing the very lies that had cost me my family. I watched Sarah soak it all in, her head held high, a benevolent smile on her face. This was her victory lap. She was the hero of her own story, and she had an entire room of people to prove it. I glanced at David. He was clapping along with everyone else, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his glass. His eyes were distant, unfocused. Was he listening to these stories? Did he believe them? Or was there a part of him buried deep down that felt the same hollowness I did? Finally, the master of ceremonies, another of Sarah's friends, scanned the room. Does anyone else want to say a few words for our wonderful couple? He asked. His eyes passed over me, then did a double take, as if he'd just noticed I was there. A flicker of panic crossed his face, but he quickly covered it with a professional smile. It was clear I wasn't on the approved list of speakers. But before he could move on, I pushed myself off the wall and gave a slight, deliberate nod. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to me. I could see Sarah stiffen, her perfect smile tightening at the edges. David looked like he was about to be physically sick. This was it. The moment she had unknowingly orchestrated. She had handed me the stage, the audience, and the microphone. And now it was my turn to speak. I picked up my untouched glass of water and walked slowly to the front of the room. The silence was absolute, a thick, heavy blanket of anticipation. Every eye was on me. Sarah's face was a locked mask of civility, but I could see the panic flashing in her eyes. David looked down at his plate, unable to meet my gaze. I raised my glass. David, Sarah, I began, my voice calm and even. 10 years is a wonderful milestone. Congratulations. I paused, letting the simple, expected words hang in the air before I changed direction completely. I'm not going to talk about marriage advice or the future, I continued, my eyes finding my son's. Instead, I want to tell you all a quick story about my son, David. It's a story about a broken window. A confused murmur rippled through the room. David's head shot up, his eyes locking with mine. He knew. In that instant, he knew exactly what story I was about to tell. David was about 10 years old, I said, my voice softening with the memory. He was a good boy, but he had a powerful arm. One summer afternoon, he and his friends were playing baseball in the backyard, and a wild pitch sent a baseball straight through our neighbor's kitchen window. I smiled gently. I'll never forget the look on his face when he came to tell me. He was pale, trembling. He was convinced his life was over. He was terrified of the punishment, of the yelling, of the disappointment. He was just a scared little boy who made a mistake. I looked directly at David, speaking only to him now, and I remember, kneeling down, looking into his terrified eyes, and in that moment, all I felt was this overwhelming wave of love, a need to protect him. So I did something I rarely did. I lied. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I went next door and told our grumpy old neighbor that I was the one who broke his window, that a rock flew up from the lawnmower. I apologized, I paid for the damage, and I took the blame because my son was scared, and it was my job to be his shield. It was a secret between us, a promise that his father would always be in his corner no matter what. I let the story settle. Then I raised my glass a little higher. I would lie for my son again in a heartbeat. I would do anything to protect him. I took a slow breath, held David's gaze, and delivered the final blow. But tonight, I'm making a promise, for his sake and for mine. I am done with lies. The words landed in the silent room with the force of a physical explosion. For a split second, nothing happened. Then David's face crumpled. A single tear rolled down his cheek, then another. A gut-wrenching sob tore from his throat, and he buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably. Sarah froze. Her perfect smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and shock. Her face went deathly pale. In that one moment, every guest in the room saw it, the truth. They saw the lie she had built crumble into dust. The pitying looks that had been thrown my way all evening now turned on her, mixed with dawning comprehension and judgment. I calmly placed my glass of water on the table, turned around without another word, and walked out the front door, leaving the ruins of her perfect party behind me. The drive home was the quietest, most peaceful drive of my life. I didn't turn on the radio, I just listened to the sound of the engine and the hum of the tires on the asphalt. I didn't feel triumphant or victorious. I just felt free. The weight of 5 years of unspoken pain, of being the villain in a story I didn't write, had finally lifted. I had spoken my truth not with anger, but with love. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. I barely slept that night, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from anxiety. The next day, a Sunday, was agonizingly slow. The house was silent. I made coffee, read the paper, and tried not to stare at my phone. I told myself I had made peace with the outcome no matter what it was. But my heart ached with a desperate hope. Around 2 p.m., the phone rang. My breath caught in my throat. It was David. I answered on the first ring. Hello? Dad? His voice was thick and hoarse like he'd been crying for hours. Dad, I'm so sorry. The words I had longed to hear for 5 years finally came, and they broke through the dam I had built around my heart. It's okay, son, I managed to say, my own voice cracking. No, it's not okay, he said, his voice filled with a raw, painful honesty. I let it happen. I was a coward. I listened to her lies because it was easier than fighting. I saw what she was doing, how she twisted everything, but I didn't stop her. I let her poison me against you. The story you told, I haven't thought about that broken window in 20 years, but last night, it was like you threw a rock through the window of my own life. I finally saw everything clearly. I saw you, Dad. I saw who you've always been. We talked for over an hour for the first time without a filter. He told me everything, how Sarah's control had started small and grown into a suffocating web. He was ashamed, broken, but determined to fix it. He told me he and Sarah were going to have a long, hard talk, but that no matter what happened, he was done with the lies too. A few days later, he came to my house, alone. We didn't say much at first. He just stepped inside and gave me a hug, the kind of hug I hadn't had from my son since he was a teenager. We sat at my kitchen table and just talked. About his life, my life, about fishing, about everything and nothing. It was simple. It was real. The next weekend, he brought Leo over. The boy was shy at first, looking at me with uncertainty. David knelt down beside him. Leo, he said gently, this is your grandpa. He loves you very much. I simply smiled and asked the boy if he wanted to see my old baseball card collection. His eyes lit up. By the end of the day, we were laughing and sharing stories. The wall was gone. My life is different now. I see my son and grandson every week. We go to baseball games, we go fishing. I'm teaching Leo how to build model airplanes. I am a father again. I am a grandfather. My life is full of a joy I thought was lost to me forever. So I have to ask you, did I do the right thing? What would you have done in my place? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an update. And please give this video a like and leave a comment down below. I read all of them, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.